I am delighted for you all to have joined me today for a social sciences passage. This has been adapted from a journal article accessible on ncbi.gov. It's entitled Conflict in Paradise. The Biosphere 2 closed ecological system facility in Arizona created a new kind of laboratory for study of global ecology and as a prototype for space life support environments and biospheres. A crew of 8 lived within a biodome for 2 years straight. Communication with the outside world was possible, but food production was required by the inhabitants. No outside exchange of food was required until the second year, as all that was needed was grown by the crew. Several stress factors emerged in the course of the study. Then as we do a quick skim of the passage, we see that workload is a stress factor, us versus them syndrome, power struggles inside and out, media attention, and criticism from some academics and scientists. My strategy for this will be to go straight to the questions and refer back to the individual paragraphs as needed. I do this because it's pretty well organized and the paragraphs do appear to be independent of each other, so I can understand them in the context of the question and I don't need to understand them connected to one another. Number 1 states, if in theory mission control's divergent desires for the crew were actually advisable, what processes might be at place to prevent the crew from accepting the advice from mission control? So coming back to the work stress factors, thinking us versus them syndrome might be a good place to start. And if that doesn't discuss this, I can jump ahead to power struggles. There were times when the biosphereans felt that mission control didn't understand what it was like carrying out the objectives inside. We're inside the dome, they aren't, and they haven't a clue what we're going through. So what processes might be at play? Okay, let's think about de-individuation for a moment. This is tempting because we're discussing a group setting where individuals might make different decisions in the group than they would as individuals. But this is a specific subset where, say you're in a mob and you put on a mask and you kind of lose your individual identity and you might engage in more deviant behavior than you otherwise would have. So there's no indication that any of these individuals are anonymous or have lost their individual identities. So I wouldn't go with D here. The Yerkes-Dodson law has to do at times with social dynamics. It most has to do with emotional arousal. So say we have an easy task and then we might need, I don't know, a lot of arousal to do an easy task, or very little arousal will optimize a hard task. But for most tasks in kind of the middle of the bell curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law states that there's some level of optimal arousal to carry out a task. It does not appear to discuss that level of optimal arousal, or if anything, they're not that optimal level of arousal, but it doesn't seem to be explicitly discussed. Groupthink is interesting. So that's this idea that a desire for harmony among the group overrides creativity or individual responsibility. And so if in theory mission control's divergent desires were actually advisable, then in that case the group is not thinking creatively, they're not thinking about the best possible solution, they just want harmony among the group. So answer to 1 would be C. 2 states, how much time per day on average did it take an individual in the group to prepare 3 meals for the crew? So not in a single day, but averaged out to a per day value. So that should be pretty clearly here, as this nifty little chart here breaks down the amount of time spent on each activity. If we had just been reading through the paragraph here, we might have stumbled across the fact that they prepared cooking duty or rotated cooking duties every 8 days. And that might confuse us because we're trying to calculate per the question stem on a per day basis, which might be easiest to use starting with a per week basis, and every 8 days might be a little bit confusing. But what we have is we have more than just that. We also have this chart here, which states that food preparation took 12% of the time and that they took 8 to 10 hours daily over all of these activities. So we can simply multiply these two across and that should give us our answer. So we have the range of 0.12 times 8 to 0.12 times 10. And we want to do the least amount of math possible. So we know that this upper limit will be 1.2 hours per day. This is our, per day, how much they're working. So if the upper limit's 1.2, we can scan for an answer selection that has 1.2 as the upper limit. And that definitely aligns to answer selection B. And if you wanted to confirm this, this would be 0.96. And this is the correct answer here. As we go to question 3, the attitudes of the small-scale scientists as compared to the crew can be described by the phenomenon of what? Okay, so we have criticism of scientists down here at the bottom. So let's go ahead and jump into that paragraph. As H.T. Odom noted, when journalists asked establishment scientists, most of whom were, okay, there we go, small scale, that's the phrase we're looking for, chemists, biologists, population ecologists, they got back the small scale dogma that system scale experiments are not science, okay? So as we're reading through the answer selections here, would this be described by achieved status versus ascribed status? So ascribed status is something that you're just given, you don't really choose to have. So let's say if I have an ethnicity of a particular type and that's assigned as a status to me, I didn't really choose that. But if I earn a position at my work, that would be an achieved status, right? These individuals, they might not have achieved a very good status according to the scientists, but they've certainly been living in a biosphere for 2 years. So I would say that they earned their status. So I don't think we can go with answer selection A. For answer choice B, primary versus secondary group, this is like the most important people to you. Your primary group might be in your wedding party, and then your secondary group might be the people in the crowd of your wedding. The crew wouldn't fit into either of those groups for the so-called small-scale scientists, so we want to go with answer selection B. The just world hypothesis states that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And I don't think the scientists are making a moral claim about the group, so I don't think it would be C. So let's just go ahead and confirm D, in group versus out group. This is deceptively simple, and there's a lot of social terms which are easy to overthink. So in group would just be the people who I consider to be in my social status and in my, group. And out group would be everybody else. So these small-scale scientists, are just thinking about the way that they think. And so they're not able to extend their groupiness, their community, their concept of who has a valid opinion outside of that context. So I do think D would best align to answer choice 3. Okay. Question 4 states, in the conflict between those who wished to maintain the self-growers eaters mission of the crew versus those who wished to conduct independent scientific research, imagine that those wishing to grow food wanted to do so in order to fulfill a duty, whereas those who wanted to conduct independent research wanted to do so out of intellectual curiosity. If these were the motivating factors for each faction, those wishing to maintain a self-sustaining community could best be described as acting out of what? So when I see power struggles inside and out, that tells me that this is some conflict within the group. And so this is probably the best paragraph to go to. But interestingly enough, this can also be approached as a pseudo-discrete question, a question that does not require passage context. And specifically, we're told basically the motivating factors of the two factions, and then we're told factors that could align with that. And then we just need to select the best answer choice. And so to save a little bit of time here, I'm actually not going to go to the paragraph here, just because I don't think it is necessary. So we have two groups, those who want to conduct independent scientific research, and they want to do so out of intellectual curiosity, and those who want to grow food want to fulfill a duty. Okay? So let's look at the answer selections: intrinsic motivation, optimal arousal, and extrinsic motivation or instinct. These are all just referring to theories of motivation, so nothing should be too surprising here. Optimal arousal refers to, again, Yerk, Dodson, Slod being one example of this, but that there might be various levels of sympathetic nervous system arousal that can optimize our performance on a task. And it doesn't appear that either of these groups are trying to create some level of optimal arousal. Instinct, probably not so much. So I think it's between intrinsic versus extrinsic. So we basically have to look at the motivations, because this is a question on motivation. So we have fulfilling a duty and intellectual curiosity. I would say fulfilling a duty more refers to extrinsic motivation, and intellectual curiosity refers to intrinsic motivation. So we just need to align correctly those wanting to maintain a self-sustaining community. Those would be the ones trying to grow food. And they did so out of this duty fulfillment. So I would say that's extrinsic motivation, making answer selection C the best for 4. Let's kick this off, or rather finish this off, with 5. The phenomena of the crew acting differently under media scrutiny as opposed to on their own can be described by the concept of what? A, socialization, B, social facilitation, C, social loafing, or D, social capital. So these are all great psychosocial vocab terms for the MCAT, so it's a great opportunity to refresh yourself on what these are, even as we get to the correct answer selection. So socialization is a process. Starts at birth with just your parents, and then it extends out to teachers and members of your community, and it's basically this whole process to teach you the norms of society, how people are supposed to act and live in a healthy community. And so if we're dealing with media attention, this is a little shorter, so let's read this here. It doesn't appear to be on a scale of time that could lead to socialization. Socialization is a process. It's not just in the moment. But let's go ahead and read the paragraph here. In response to public demand, the project management allowed extensive press interviews and coverage of the experiment. Press coverage fluctuated between praise and dismissal. Media attention and the responsibility for interviews took much emotional energy. Okay? So now we're looking more at actions. Why did they act differently when they were being observed? Okay? So again, that's not the concept of socialization, so I think we can safely rule out A. How about social loafing? This is when you're in a group of people and you don't have a lot of structure to your group, so you don't have a lot of individual accountability. And then people tend to end up doing less as individuals in the group than they would have on their own. So that's why it's very important, say, if you have group study, to give people assignments, prepare ahead of time for how you're going to get the most out of your time. I really don't see them being more, lazy under the observation of the media. And I also don't know if the media would be considered part of their group. So if that could be extended to the idea of social loafing. So I would rule out answer selection C. Social capital refers to the idea of a social network. You've got all these nodes of contact, and you can be so many, contacts away from a point of social support. But across all of your network, the amount of material support you can tap into, if you want to be oversimplified, you could say the amount of money you could borrow at any given time from your social network or have funded would be your social capital. So that's certainly not discussed here with media attention. How about social facilitation? Again, just really going back a lot to this idea of optimal arousal and Yerk-Dodson law. Social facilitation is where we discussed on the first set of questions actually is that hard tasks are better optimized with low stimulation and simple tasks with high stimulation. And it's a very general observation. It's not simple versus complex. This is all tasks have some level of factor where being observed affects your performance. So performance has to do with action, so that aligns to this phrase here. And social facilitation has to do with observation, and media attention certainly fits that bill. So we can safely select answer selection B for question